Mr. Holmes, ito, asking for a friend, asking for many friends, actually. What exactly was the question? How
Yeah.
exactly was it phrased?
Ang pagkaka-phrase ng question is essentially the same question that we've asked in the past, no? Meron po, this is with regard to the performance rating. Meron ako rito mga pangalan ng ilang mga kasalukuyang opisyal ng pamahalaan. Pakisabi nyo ang inyong opinion tungkol sa pagganap nila ng kanilang tungkulin itong nakaraang 3 buwan sa pamamagitan ng board na ito. Kayo po ba ay, then you read out the name of the person, Presidente Rodrigo Duterte, kayo po ba ay talagang aprobado, hindi masabi kung aprobado o hindi aprobado o talagang hindi aprobado. So it's the same question that we've run over the last 20 years with regard to approval. The same thing with regard to trust rating. We ask the same thing. Meron kaming listahan dito ng mga opisyal, ng pamahalaan, pagsabi po kung kayo busang nagtitiwala, hindi masabi kung nagtitiwala o hindi nagtitiwala, up to lubusang hindi nagtitiwala. So that's a question that is asked for both the performance and the trust ratings.
Okay, now let's get into the results, because regardless of the skepticism of people with regards to the methodology, the reality is 91%, kahit ano pang margin of error mo dyan. I mean, the bottom line is very, very popular, very high approval ratings for President Duterte. Let's get into what you know, maybe inevitably some speculation as well. But what exactly is going on here? I mean, parang wala talagang tinag ang popularity and approval for President Duterte. What is factoring into that, especially in the middle of this crisis when it seems like even government was braced for bad news? I'm sure to a certain extent, even they are pleasantly surprised. But to what would you attribute itong resiliency ng popularity and approval for President Duterte?
Well, there are a number of things. So one is that we should recognize that in what is distinct with regard to the president right now, which I think previous President Aquino also enjoyed, is that from the very start they had high approval and trust ratings. In the case of President Duterte, his approval and trust ratings, if I'm not mistaken, was in the high 80s at the start. His trust rating in July 2016 was 91, exactly the same trust rating that he has right now. So he's basically carrying over a series of trust and approval ratings that were at the high side. Significant majorities approving of the president. Now, would that significant majority change their disposition towards their appreciation of the performance of the president or their trust of the president at a time when the country is faced with a crisis? Would they attribute whatever happens or consequences of the pandemic, would they hold the president accountable for that? I think that's the question here, right? And it
Yes.
shows, basically, the survey results show that they do not hold the president directly accountable for whatever have been the consequences of the pandemic.
Kumbaga,
There could be
hindi niya naman kasalanan ng COVID, kumbaga, the bottom line.
Hindi niya kasalanan yung pagiging yung pandemic in the first place dahil global naman yan. Ang pananaw ng karamihan diyan, ang marami diyan na nagsasabing aprobado, nagtitiwala sa Pangulo, naniniwala sila na ang Pangulo ginawa niya ang kanyang tungkulin. Nagsagawa siya ng quarantine o tinatawag na lockdown, nagbigay siya ng social amelioration support. The social amelioration support came in 2 rounds, right? At the time that we conducted that survey, we should also note this down. Many of the places in the country were already in MGCQ and GCQ. So kumbaga, nakahinga na yung mamamayan doon sa mahigpit na lockdown ng unang buwan. Sa maraming bagay kang maaring banggitin, ang pandemya ay global at maaring ang mga tao alam nila na sa ibang lugar, pareho rin ang kaganapan, malala rin ang sitwasyon, marami rin na walang trabaho, marami rin na nagugutom. Sa ating bansa, maaaring naniwala sila na nabalitaan nila na dahil sa paghihigpit ay hindi masyadong lumaki ang bilang ng COVID. There are a number of things that we can say if we just simply track the developments. But definitely, with the performance and trust ratings, they're not holding the president directly accountable.
Yes, sir. But I suppose some people are wondering how he was able to sustain these high numbers, given the fact that he would only appear once a week and very, very late night, very, very late Monday nights pa. we what we usually do hear from or see are his lieutenants. Does that mean that yung actions ng kanyang lieutenants that helps to beef up the president's performance ratings?
Well, it's not so much that, Ed. I think it will really be, and it's something that we should actually be able to study. What have been the reports about the president's activities and actions during the pandemic? As when we do our surveys, we normally ask what's the primary source of news of respondents, and the primary source still is television. In this survey, for example, 84% will say that their primary source is television. What I'm not familiar with, because I have not been tracking it, is essentially the type of news reports about the president on television. I do see on social media a number of criticisms, no, being leveled against the president. But social media as a source of news is quite insignificant relative to television and radio as the primary source of news. So whether if social media is full of criticisms, and there are basically two types of exchanges there, right? For or against. And to a certain extent, we know that those are echo chambers of certain groups. What about television, which is the primary source of information? Have they dished out direct criticisms against this president compared to former presidents? All of you have been monitoring former presidents in the past. We're basically in the same generation. This president has relatively been free from the same direct criticism that former presidents have experienced.
Mr. Holmes, just to bring it back to Mr. Duterte before we let you go. Malinaw naman po yung sinabi niyo. I mean, there are certain things, the big pictures here, COVID, to an extent, the economic recession caused by COVID, mukhang hindi yan binabaling ng mga tao sa presidente. A lot of it was really out of his control. But what about the things that were in his control and not in the context of COVID? For example, in the past months, PhilHealth, corruption in PhilHealth, a lot of question about the competency of some cabinet members, particularly the DOH not taking action there, and then for that matter, ABS-CBN. That was a popular issue. It seemed to be something that people could understand. What does the high approval ratings for President Duterte mean with regards to these issues that, in fairness, he did have more control over?
Yeah, Robbie, I understand. Let me begin with ABS-CBN. The way that he framed the ABS-CBN shutdown was us against them again. His normal populist rhetoric. So his attack on oligarchs, remember? That was how he started in his State of the Nation address. So that is the one that has actually generated support from him, even during the campaign. And he sustains that particular rhetoric up to the present, right? The last thing that we heard yesterday was the reports that I saw today, he was asking a company to give for free the cars that are used, no, for transportation, for buses. And that's the type of us against them angle that Duterte has exploited. The president has exploited from the very start. Now, with respect to as you point in your words, the incompetence, then the corruption that is happening to around the president or below the president, we've had presidents in the past who have not also been affected by the ineptitude, incompetence, or the corruption that involves their subordinates. Except when they themselves, their own personal integrity is put into question.